I was brought up in the 80s. I was born in 75. No health and safety. It also gave us young boys an outlet into all the things that young boys do. Play war games in the woods. We would make catapults and we would make crossbows. The Wilkinson sword survival knife was the thing that we aspired to.
Come over. Don't fight how you really feel. Come closer to
Hi all, hope you're good. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got into knives, collecting them, reviewing them, what was the first knife I ever bought, and then the knives that kind of got me up to some of the higher spec models that my interest is in today. So when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I was brought up in the 80s. I was born in 75, so of course early 80s. We had an era back then where we were pretty much no health and safety, no sort of social workers coming round because the teachers had complained about something you said at school. It was pretty much a free-for-all for us kids. So for me, that was a really good and healthy time growing up, because although of course health and safety is important, it also gave us young boys an outlet into all the things that young boys do. So we used to like to play war games in the woods, and we would go to the toy shop and buy these like model cap guns, which would probably be banned now because they looked really realistic. We'd be pointing them at each other, and we would make catapults and we would make crossbows and all kinds of stuff. And of course a natural thing for us to want would be knives, so we could whittle sticks and make these various different things in the woods. We used to buy Combat and Survival magazine and be looking through that and look through all the pages and think, oh my god, the Wilkinson sword survival knife was the thing that we aspired to, but that cost about £200 back then, so there was no way our parents were going to buy us one of those. I think the Falcon even F1 was a big deal as well, and that might have come a little bit later. And we also used to look through all the martial arts magazines back then and see all these cool martial arts implements that were in there, and you could mail order all this stuff in. But I remember being in a hardware shop with my mum when I was sort of 6 or 7 years old, just a local village hardware shop, and they had a sign up, a little cardboard sign with all these knives on it, and it said pocket money jackknife, and on that were these Disney knives that were just small pen knives. I'll put a link up. I wish I still had this knife because they're pretty rare now, and I'm sure they would fetch some pretty decent money. And this particular one had Disney's Goofy on it, and it was just a small slip joint pen knife, and in a traditional style, and I was really keen on getting this. So my mum just said, yeah, sure, as long as you don't cut yourself. And that was like in the 80s, that was the go-to thing. I remember saying things like we would go off with air rifles into the woods and say to my mum, or we'd all say to our mums, oh, we're going off to play war with the air rifles, and our parents would just say, well, be careful not to shoot each other in the eye. And that was kind of a go-to saying. No one really thought any more about it. I'm sure there were loads of injuries back then. We were all pretty lucky, but crazy times, but very healthy for young boys growing up to kind of experience some of that risk taking and getting out there and being on our own and not having that parental oversight and government oversight over what we were doing, and just letting us be little boys in the woods. It was great fun. So I used to go out off with this knife. We would all walk around the streets with these things, and be whittling bits of wood and stuff. No one gave a damn. The police wouldn't even be around. None of the neighbours cared. They would just look out the window and say, oh, the boys are playing with wood again. No big deal. And then about a year or so later, I'd set my heart on a Swiss Army knife. I wanted one that had all the bits and pieces. I think I finally settled on the handyman variant, so I still actually have a Swiss Army knife. This little model here, and what I actually use this most of all for, to be honest, is toothpick and tweezers. It does have some other handy functions, but I rarely use those. I mainly use toothpick and tweezers, and I just keep that in my bag for, you know, emergency use. And I really like them. They're very handy. They kind of get a bad rap. People think they're a bit nerdy or whatever, but I think they're awesome. I would always have one of these. And as a kid, I absolutely loved it. The one I had like multiple blades. I think it had about 20 different functional blades on it, fish scalers and all kinds of stuff. And I actually used to use a lot of those. You know, it had a little saw blade. I used to use that in the woods. We would cut bits of wood down and make those into various different implements. I would use the fish scaler because we would go fishing and we would, you know, scale these fish and bring them back. My nan would then cook them. You know, they never tasted very good, but we were all chuffed as little kids to be able to do that. And you know, there were the reamer. We used to use that for like making holes in these bits of wood. So I remember making like a crossbow and using the reamer to ream out little holes in the end of the arrow. And then the firing device was actually a clothes peg that I'd nicked off my mum with a hole reamed through that, and then I'd pushed a matchstick through it, so then the clothes peg would shut on the back of the arrow and the little bit of matchstick would just fit in the reamed hole of the base of the arrow, and it would just pin that and hold it in there, and then when you press the clothes peg down, of course the arrow would release. Pretty ingenious stuff for little kids, but we used to do all that with, you know, our little pen knives, and that was good times, man. Then time went on. Obviously we got older, got interested in girls and disco whatevers, and, you know, smoking cigarettes behind the bike sheds and all that kind of thing, and all that kind of dwindled away, which was sad, but, you know, that's the story of most young lads. And then gradually, of course, you grow out of that, and you know, you start to settle down. You've got a steady girlfriend or whatever, and my interest peaked again in that kind of thing. I used to like to go out and go a bit camping, still into fishing, do a bit of you know, walking in the woods and all that kind of thing, a bit bushcrafty stuff. And so I wanted to get myself a decent knife for doing that. I didn't know much about knives at the time. You know, looking at it now, I would obviously have bought a decent bushcraft blade, probably a fixed blade. But back then, you know, I had no clue. I just bought something that I thought looked really cool. So I ended up with this, the first ever sort of what I would call a modern kind of tactical knife. It's a CRKT Hammond Cruiser. This one's actually had a slight reprofile because it's pretty old now, and it had the tips snapped on it, so I did a decent job actually of putting a new tip on. I did that with the work sharp. It's had a good few sharpens, but this was kind of a groundbreaking knife because they were very cheap. It's got a little locking mechanism there, so it's a standard liner lock, but you actually have to pull that back, so it's like a secondary lock, so you can shut that up. It's not running very smooth at the moment, but as you can see, it is reasonable deep carry pocket clip, and a very, very comfortable handle. Not overly light, but certainly not too bad. It's not got an exotic blade still. I think it's you know, a standard stainless like an MOV type blade still, but it certainly does the job. Relatively easy to sharpen, and I was absolutely chuffed to bits with that. It didn't prove to be the greatest thing for using in the woods, so although I did use it, you know, and I'd carry it, I'd take it with me fishing and use it in the woods, I ended up actually buying a Mora knife, which are bargain of the century. You know, they're absolutely bomb proof, they're super cheap. I'll stick a link up below for those of you that don't know about Mora knives. but they are absolute value for money. If you want to do any bushcrafting, or you just need a knife for sort of general use in the workshop or anything like that, I would thoroughly recommend a Mora knife. But I also at the same time wanted something a bit cooler, a bit more tactical in the fixed blade variant, so I went and bought myself that, which again, pretty old now. It's had a fair amount of use around the workshop, and this gets used, to be honest, for prying and stuff like that. And this is a Boka Kalashnikov. It did have a sort of metallic handle on it, which ended up getting taken off and rewrapped because paracord was all the rage at the time. Got a Tanto-esque blade on it, 440C stainless, and although it kind of looks cool, that taught me an important lesson. You know, it's horses for courses, and that blade is not the greatest. The 440C, maybe it hasn't had a great heat treat. I have used 440C blades that are a lot better, but that one in particular, it doesn't sharpen up too well, the edge doesn't hold too well, and it's not particularly usable just because it hasn't got much weight in the blade, so you're not going to do any chopping or anything like that with it. It's a very tactical orientated knife, so you know, if you were someone who was picking something out for like self-defense in the military or whatever, it's the kind of blade shape that might suit that. But the quality of the steel, you know, there's so many better options out there. I just can't imagine anyone choosing that nowadays. The sheath on it again looked really tactical for the time. It's got this sort of drop leg part to it that would go around your leg, and another one there. It's got this dangler bit here which makes it sit very, very low, and to be honest, it's cumbersome. It had two fasteners across here that were originally pop studs. That one's actually broken away, and then this one used to be a pop stud. I've stuck a bit of Velcro on that one just to hold it in, and that just sits in the workshop now. But yeah, that taught me, you know, do a bit of research, find out what your application is, and buy a knife suitable for that application. Not long after that, I started running a webpage called Guns and Zen, and on that I was basically reviewing various different bits of kit for going out, you know, outdoorsmanship and shooting related, hunting related, all that kind of thing. And so I started reviewing knives on there, and those reviews were all written reviews with some high quality photography in it, because I was doing a lot of photography at the time. I used to do weddings and stuff like that, and artistic stuff. So I started doing a lot of product photography for knives. I ended up being, I was doing all the product photography for Schrade knives, so I got a lot of my photography featured by them in catalogues and stuff until they were sold out to BTI brands. And I did a couple of bits for Fulton even, and a couple of other companies that really liked the images, so they were using those. And this was kind of right at the beginning of the time when knife companies had sort of seized on the fact that social media was around. They could put out some pretty cool images of stuff on social media, and it was kind of before like influencers had become a really big thing like they are now. So a lot of the knife companies now are just using people that have got a bit of a following or fan photos, etc., getting them sent in, so they're not employing photographers anymore. But that used to be a thing, that you would kind of get a photographer and get him to take some pictures for you. So that got me into the whole knife collection thing, the review thing, got me interested in different blade steels, different types of knives, etc. And you know, people often say, like my friends and family say, oh, knives are not very nice things, you know, they're pretty horrid things. And I disagree. You know, they can be used for nefarious purposes, and they can be used by unpleasant people. But most unpleasant criminals are not using high quality knives. They are using sharpened screwdrivers, old kitchen knives, and really cheap sort of beater knives, gas station knives, like £3 or £4 and whatever from a cheapo shop. They're not spending, £150 on a high quality folding knife. So they kind of get demonized in my view a little bit. And we also must accept that knives are one of the most pivotal hand tools in humankind, that we wouldn't have developed as human beings the way we have if we hadn't have developed knives and we hadn't have used knives, because they allow us to process all our food, they allow us to kill our food, they've allowed us in the past to defend ourselves against attack, and they've really shaped human history. And without them, we would be totally lost. If people keep talking about, all knives should be banned. Well, good luck with that, because we use those every single day. And if you really think about it, a knife is just a sharp piece of metal, and every day you're using a sharp piece of metal for something. Whether that be, you could use that for woodworking, you can use that for food preparation, you actually use it for eating your food, after the preparation. So we use them all the time. So you're never going to eradicate those, and you're never going to eradicate the human ability to sharpen a piece of metal, because even if you ban the sale of all knives, you're going to ban the sale of all metal as well, and ban the sale of all abrasive substances to make that metal sharp at the edge. It's not rocket science, it's just a piece of metal that's been sharpened. We should tighten the laws up on the use of the things. So, if you go around doing something bad with a knife, you should probably go to prison for 20 plus years, in my personal opinion. That would greatly reduce the people on the streets that are going around using these things in an unpleasant manner. So that's my story, my backstory of where this all came from. I hope that answers some questions. It's pretty interesting looking back at some of the stuff and sort of reminiscing about being a kid. Good to talk to you guys. See you all soon. Have a great weekend.